The universe was vast, and not all of it was peaceful. Far on the edge of a quiet galaxy, a desperate cry echoed through the stars. It came from a race of aliens called the Urantians, a species so secretive that most other beings didn't even know they existed. They had lived in isolation for centuries, keeping to their distant home planet, far from the prying eyes of galactic civilization. But now, something was threatening their very existence. The Urantians had no choice but to send out a distress signal, a last-ditch effort to save their species. The message was brief, a simple plea for help that barely conveyed the gravity of their situation. They knew that if no one responded, their fate was sealed. A deadly predatory species was hunting them down, destroying entire worlds in its path. The Urantians had been on the run, their once protected planet now under constant siege. No help had arrived, until now. In the depths of space, aboard a massive starship, the crew of the Deathworlder fleet received the Urantians' call. The fleet's captain, Commander Rylan, stood at the center of the command deck, staring at the blinking red light of the distress signal. His face was stern, eyes narrowed in concentration. The Deathworlder fleet was notorious throughout the galaxy, but few understood why. Humans and their allies, the various species that had survived on Deathworlds, were unmatched in terms of raw strength, survival skills, and fierce combat tactics. They had fought wars on planets where even the environment was an enemy. The members of this fleet were the best of the best. "This is it," Ryland said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We've been waiting for a challenge like this. Prepare to move out." We head to their coordinates immediately. The crew sprang into action, knowing that this mission wasn't going to be easy. The Deathworlder fleet was not just a group of warriors. It was a symbol of resilience. They had faced every kind of threat imaginable on their home planets, from creatures that could kill with a glance to ecosystems that could break a man down in minutes. But this enemy, this predatory species, was unlike anything they had ever seen. Still, the Deathworlders were ready for anything. As the fleet set its course, Ryland turned to his second-in-command, a female warrior named Lyra. Her sharp eyes never left the star maps on the screen in front of her. "What do we know about the Urantians?" he asked. "Not much," Lyra replied. "They've been isolated for centuries. They've only sent out a handful of messages to nearby systems, and those came before the predators attacked. They're defensive, not offensive. This cry for help, it's something they've never done before." Ryland nodded. "Then they must be desperate. We'll meet them halfway." With that, the Deathworlder fleet entered warp speed, leaving behind the safety of their home systems and heading toward an unknown battlefield. Their reputation as the deadliest force in the galaxy would be tested in ways they had never imagined. But for now, their mission was clear: protect the Urantians and end the threat that had pushed them to the brink of destruction. The stars streaked by as the Deathworlder fleet traveled at high speed toward the Urantian homeworld. Commander Ryland stood at the front of the command deck, his eyes locked on the star map displayed before him. The silence in the room was almost tangible. Only the hum of the ship's engines filled the air, a constant reminder of the power that surged beneath the hull. Ryland's mind was sharp, his thoughts calculating each move ahead. He knew that this wasn't just another mission. The Urantians' distress signal had shaken something deep inside him. For the first time in years, he felt a true sense of purpose. These aliens had survived on a planet that few could even survive on for a moment. If they were in danger, then something truly dangerous was at play. "We'll arrive at their coordinates in 4 hours," Lyra, the second-in-command, said, breaking the silence. She stood at a console, watching the ships approach. "The Urantians have a planetary defense grid, but it's likely compromised. Whatever attacked them must have found a way through." Ryland nodded. "Keep an eye on their system. We need to know everything we can about this predator before we make contact. The last thing we want is to walk into an ambush." Lyra punched in a few commands, and the display flickered as a new set of data came up on the screen. The predator species was unlike any they had encountered. They were not just warriors, but hunters. Their ships were alive, part organic and part mechanical. They could survive in space without ships, their biology capable of withstanding the harshest environments. These predators had wiped out entire civilizations without a trace. The Deathworlders, despite their strength and tactics, had no idea how they would fight such an enemy. What kind of threat are we dealing with here? Ryland muttered under his breath, staring at the data. He turned to his crew. Prepare for anything. This isn't a standard rescue operation anymore. It's a full-scale war. As the fleet neared the Orantian system, the first thing that greeted them was the silence. There were no signs of a battle, no explosions or distant flashes of laser fire. Everything was still, like a calm before a storm. But Ryland had seen enough to know that silence was often the most dangerous thing to encounter. All ships, power up weapons and shields, he ordered. We don't know what we're walking into. Stay alert. The fleet's ships, designed for speed and combat, began to hum with life as their engines powered up and weapon systems came online. Ryland looked over the fleet, a mix of humans and other species, all hardened by years of fighting and surviving on deadly planets. They had faced everything from hostile alien creatures to extreme natural disasters, and yet this felt different. It was more than just a mission. It was a test. You think the Orantians will trust us? Lyra asked, her eyes narrowing. They'll have to, Ryland replied. They've seen the worst. Now they'll see what happens when you call upon the Deathworlder fleet. As the fleet entered the outer rim of the system, the tension was thick. The Orantian homeworld came into view, beautiful, lush, and serene, but marred by the distant signs of destruction. Massive, smoking craters dotted the landscape. The once proud cityscape of the Orantians now lay in ruins. Ryland's heart tightened as he saw the planet's condition. They had arrived too late. Get me a direct line to their leaders, Ryland ordered. Let's see what's left of their resistance. The time for waiting was over. It was time to fight, and the Deathworlder fleet would show no mercy. As the Deathworlder fleet entered the atmosphere of the Orantian system, the silence was broken by a harsh crackle from the communication console. A tense moment passed before the voice of the Orantian leader, an elder named Veller, came through the speakers. His voice was shaky, as though the weight of his people's despair had taken its toll. Commander Ryland, you have come at last, but I fear it may be too late. Ryland's jaw tightened at the words. He understood the hopelessness in the elder's voice. It was clear the Orantians had been fighting a losing battle. Veller, Ryland began, his voice calm but firm. We're here to help. Tell us everything. What exactly are we facing? For a long moment, there was silence. Then, Veller's voice returned, filled with reluctant fear. The predators that have attacked us are not like any we've encountered. They are not merely invaders. They are hunters, capable of tracking and destroying entire worlds. Our people are scattered, and our defenses have been torn apart. We are alone. Ryland listened closely. The Orantians' reputation as a strong and secretive race had always been a point of pride for them, but it seemed that their isolation had left them unprepared for an enemy like this. We will not abandon you, Ryland said firmly. Our fleet is strong. We'll stand with you until this is over. Veller hesitated before replying, his voice quieter now. We have no other allies. No one will help us, and even if they did, it would be too late. We don't know how long we can last. A feeling of urgency swept over Ryland as he looked at the faces of his crew. They had fought countless enemies, but this was different. The scale of destruction in the Orantian system was unlike anything they had ever seen, and still, they had to keep moving forward. We'll deal with that later, Ryland said, his voice resolute. For now, we need to focus on the present. We'll do everything in our power to save your people. He cut the communication for a moment and turned to Lyra, who had been monitoring the situation closely. What do we know about these predators? He asked, his eyes dark with concern. Are they capable of space travel? Lyra nodded, her fingers quickly typing commands into her console. Yes, Commander. Their ships are living creatures, capable of surviving in the harshest conditions. They can adapt to almost anything, and their biological makeup allows them to thrive in space, using it as a hunting ground. They're not just invaders, they're predators in every sense of the word. Ryland felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had heard stories of such creatures, but never had he imagined that they were real. Then we need to act fast, he said. We'll need to set up a defense perimeter around your planet, Feller. We can't afford to wait any longer. The Arantian leader's voice was quieter this time, almost as if he had given up hope. Do you think you can stop them, Commander? We've already lost everything. Ryland's response was unwavering. We are the Deathworlder fleet. We don't lose. We fight to the end, and we will make sure your people survive. As the line went silent, Ryland turned to his crew. Prepare for battle. We'll need everything we have to hold this position. The Deathworlders, their faces set with grim determination, began to make their final preparations. Weapons were checked, and the fleet's massive ships moved into position around the planet, ready to face the unknown enemy. And so the alliance was formed. The Arantians, once proud and isolated, now found themselves with unlikely allies. They were no longer alone in the fight for their survival. The Deathworlder fleet formed a tight defensive perimeter around the Arantian planet. The massive ships loomed over the surface, their sleek, deadly silhouettes blocking out the light of nearby stars. The calm that had settled on the fleet's command deck was almost unnatural. Every crew member knew the gravity of the situation. This was not just a rescue mission anymore. It was a battle for survival. Commander Ryland stood at the helm of the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes scanned the view screen, which now displayed a live feed of the Arantian planet. The once thriving world now looked like a scared battlefield, with smoke rising from craters and ruined cities. Ryland could sense the weight of the Arantians' loss, their hope nearly extinguished. But as long as they stood together, there was a chance. Commander, we have incoming, Lyra said sharply, her voice cutting through the tense silence. I'm picking up multiple ships on approach. They're not Arantian vessels. Ryland's expression hardened. Predators, he muttered under his breath. The feed from the sensors flashed with bright red warnings. The enemy ships had arrived, but they were not like anything the Deathworlders had ever seen. The Predator ships looked organic, huge, dark, and pulsing, as though they were alive. Their surface was lined with jagged edges, almost like bone, with glowing lines running across them like veins. These ships were predators in every sense of the word. They're here, Lyra confirmed, and they mean business. Ryland's voice was steady as he addressed the fleet. Prepare for battle. No one is to underestimate these creatures. They've wiped out entire planets before, but today they faced the Deathworlder fleet. The ship's engines roared to life as the Deathworlder fleet powered up their weapons and shields. The crew of the command deck moved swiftly, every person knowing their role. The planet below was already in danger, and there was no turning back now. As the enemy ships closed in, the Deathworlders spread out, positioning themselves for a coordinated strike. Ryland was already issuing orders, guiding the fleet with precision. He knew that even though they were vastly outnumbered, their strength lay in their tactics and relentless spirit. Focus fire on their lead ship, Ryland ordered, his tone firm. That's their command vessel. If we destroy it, we'll scatter the rest. The Deathworlder ships launched powerful blasts of energy toward the enemy. The Predator ships retaliated, firing enormous energy beams from their organic hulls. The battle was brutal. Explosions lit up the dark void of space as ships collided in flashes of light and fire. The Deathworlders fought with everything they had, dodging incoming attacks with skillful maneuvers. Their ships were fast and agile, a stark contrast to the bulky, hulking Predator ships. The Deathworlders had spent years perfecting their tactics, and it showed. They didn't just fight. They adapted, quickly learning how the enemy moved, how their ships fought, and where their weaknesses were. On the command deck, Rylan watched the battle unfold, his eyes locked on the enemy's lead ship. A predator vessel, unlike anything they had ever seen, was firing relentlessly, but it was beginning to slow. The Deathworlders had already begun to crack its armor. "We've got them," Lyra said, a spark of confidence in her voice. "The lead ship is down. The rest are falling back." Rylan nodded. "Keep the pressure on. Don't give them time to regroup." But just as the battle seemed to be turning in their favor, something unexpected happened. The remaining predator ships pulled back, retreating into the darkness of space. It was clear now. These creatures were not just fighters. They were cunning. Rylan stared at the empty space where the enemy ships had been, knowing this wasn't over. "They're regrouping," he said. "Prepare for the next wave. We've won this round, but the war is far from over." The Deathworlder fleet held its position, knowing that the worst was yet to come, but they had proved their power, their resilience. The Predators had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the might of the Deathworlder fleet. The battle had barely ended, and yet the silence in the aftermath felt heavier than ever. The Deathworlder fleet had pushed back the Predators for now, but they knew the creatures would return. These weren't enemies that simply surrendered after one defeat. No, the Predators were relentless, and the next wave would be even more dangerous. As the fleet's ships pulled back into a defensive formation around the Arantian planet, Commander Rylan stood at the front of the command deck, staring out at the expanse of space. He was calculating his next move, but his mind was also occupied with the events of the past few hours. The battle had been fierce, but they had won. For now. Lyra stepped up beside him. "They're not going to let us off that easy, are they?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with the understanding of someone who had been in countless battles. Rylan shook his head. "No, they'll be back, and when they do, they'll come in full force. The Predators don't retreat unless they're regrouping for something bigger. We need to be ready." As the command deck hummed with activity, a signal came through from the Arantians. Velder, their leader, appeared on the screen. The old alien's face was lined with worry, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a hope that hadn't been there before. "Commander Rylan," Velder began, his voice strained but filled with gratitude. "We owe you our lives. Your fleet is incredible. I can hardly believe you managed to hold them back. Our people had given up hope. But you've brought us something we thought we would never see again." Rylan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It's not over yet, Velder. The Predators are cunning. We've fought them off once, but we need a strategy. I can't promise your people are safe just yet." Velder's eyes softened. "You don't understand," he said, his voice almost breaking. "You've done what we couldn't. Our people have been isolated for so long. We never learned how to ask for help. We were proud, and we believed we could survive alone. But now, we see the truth. You are the ones who can save us." Rylan didn't respond right away. He knew the Arantians had always been a proud people, and their reluctance to trust outsiders had nearly cost them their survival. The trust that had developed between the Deathworlders and the Arantians, though still fragile, was now undeniable. They had fought together, and for the first time in a long time, the Arantians weren't standing alone. "We've fought many enemies in our time," Rylan said finally, "but we can't do this alone. We need your help. You know your planet better than anyone. You've seen things we haven't. If we're going to stop the Predators, we need your resources, your knowledge, your people." There was a long pause before Velder spoke again, his voice steady. "You'll have everything we can offer. Our weapons, our knowledge, and most importantly, our warriors. We may not have your strength, Commander, but we have something else. Determination. We will fight with you. Together, we will make sure these Predators never set foot on our world again." Rylan felt a surge of respect for the alien leader. The Arantians had once stood apart from the galaxy, refusing to trust anyone. Now they were willing to fight side by side with the Deathworlders. It was the beginning of something new, an alliance forged in the fire of war. "Then let's get to work," Ryland said, his tone filled with resolve. "We have a battle to win." The crews of both the Deathworlders and the Arantians worked side by side, sharing technology, strategies, and resources. The Deathworlders taught the Arantians their combat tactics, and the Arantians shared their knowledge of the terrain and their home planet's defenses. It was a true partnership, a union of two races, once divided, now united by the same goal. As the days passed, the fleet's defenses were strengthened. The Arantians, once isolated, now found themselves surrounded by powerful allies. Ryland knew that their combined forces would stand a much better chance against the Predators. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come, and they would need every ounce of strength, courage, and teamwork to win. The alliance between the Deathworlders and the Arantians was now in full swing. They had spent days preparing, sharing resources and knowledge, strengthening their defenses, and creating strategies to counter the Predators. But despite their efforts, the tension was growing. Every ship was ready for battle, but no one knew when the next attack would come. Commander Ryland stood at the front of the command deck, his arms crossed as he stared out at the stars. The Arantian planet was still visible on the view screen, surrounded by the Deathworlder fleet. The once pristine world had been scared by the Predators' assault, but it still held its beauty, and it was worth fighting for. "We've done everything we can," Ryland muttered to Lyra, who was standing beside him. "Now we wait, but I have a feeling they won't give us time to rest." Lyra nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the sensor readings. "The Predators are regrouping. I can feel it. They'll attack again soon, and they'll be better prepared this time." Ryland sighed, knowing she was right. The first wave had been tough, but it had only been a test. The Predators were far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Their ships were alive, capable of adapting to almost anything the Deathworlders threw at them. And their relentless nature meant they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every last trace of the Arantians. The ships of the Deathworlder fleet powered up, their weapons systems humming with energy. The crew moved quickly and quietly, each person focused on their task. Ryland's mind raced as he thought about their next move. The Predators had learned from their first defeat, and now they had an even greater advantage. They had learned to adapt. "We need to find a way to disable their ships," Ryland said, breaking the silence. "If we don't, they'll just keep coming. They'll outlast us." Lyra was already pulling up information on the Predator ships. "We tried targeting their engines, their weapons, but nothing seems to work. Their ships regenerate quickly, and their biology adapts to every hit we land." "Then we hit them where it hurts the most," Ryland replied, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We'll target their nerve centers, the parts of their ships that keep them alive. Without those, they'll be nothing but empty shells." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "That's risky. If we fail, we could make things worse." "I know," Ryland said, "but we don't have a choice. If we don't do something bold, they'll destroy everything we've fought for." At that moment, the communication system buzzed to life. Veller's face appeared on the screen. His expression was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes. "Commander Ryland," he said, his voice steady, "we've picked up a new signal from the Predators. They're preparing for their next wave. They've brought in reinforcements." Ryland's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Thousands," Veller replied. "They're assembling a fleet. We estimate their numbers are greater than ours, but we can still win if we fight together." Ryland nodded. "We will fight together. Get your people ready. This isn't just about protecting your planet anymore. This is about stopping them once and for all." The Deathworlder fleet powered up, moving into position around the planet as the Predator ships emerged from the shadows. The enemy was vast, their ships now surrounding the Arantian world from every direction. The Predators had come to finish what they had started. But Ryland wasn't worried. The Deathworlders had fought wars on planets far more dangerous than this one. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. And today, they would do it again. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with the Deathworlder fleet," Ryland said, his voice firm with resolve. The first shots rang out as the battle escalated. The Predator fleet opened fire, but the Deathworlders were ready. The battle raged across the stars, a brutal clash of strength, strategy, and survival. Every shot fired was a step toward victory, but the Predators weren't going down without a fight. The Deathworlders would have to be faster, smarter, and fiercer than ever before. This battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The space around the Orantian planet had become a war zone. The Deathworlder fleet and the Predators clashed in a violent storm of fire and destruction. The sky was filled with flashes of light as ships of every size engaged in battle, the space around the planet shaking with each explosion. Commander Ryland stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes focused on the chaos outside. "We need to take control," Ryland said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "If we don't, we'll lose the planet and everything we've worked for." Lyra, standing next to him, nodded. She had been in countless battles, but even she could feel the weight of this one. The stakes had never been higher. "We've pushed them back before, but this time, they're better prepared. Their reinforcements are endless." Ryland didn't flinch. "We'll fight harder. We've trained for this. Our warriors are ready, and we have the advantage of knowing their weaknesses." The Predator fleet had brought new, stronger ships, but the Deathworlders had adapted. Every move they made was calculated, every tactic designed to wear the Predators down. But despite their advantages, it was clear that the battle would not be won easily. The Predators were ruthless, and they weren't about to back down. As the Deathworlders launched another round of attacks, their ships moving with deadly precision, Ryland's thoughts were interrupted by a new communication. Velder's face appeared on the screen. The Orantian leader's expression was grave. "We've managed to hold them off for now," Velder said, his voice steady. "But their forces are overwhelming. We can't keep this up much longer." "What do you suggest, Commander?" Ryland took a deep breath. The situation was dire. The Deathworlders had already lost too many ships, and the Predators were showing no signs of retreat. "We need to launch a direct strike at their command ship," Ryland said, his mind working quickly. "If we can disable their leader's vessel, we can cripple their entire fleet." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. Their command ship is heavily protected. It would take everything we've got." "We don't have time for anything else," Ryland replied. "If we don't act now, we'll lose this entire battle." Velder's eyes flashed with understanding. "You're right. We'll prepare our ships for the assault. We'll give you all the support we can." The Deathworlders moved into position, their ships ready for the final push. The Predator's command ship loomed in the distance, a massive dark vessel surrounded by smaller, heavily armed ships. It was their most powerful weapon, and it was also their greatest weakness. "We're going in," Ryland said. "Everyone, focus fire on their command ship. We disable that, and the rest will fall apart." With a roar, the fleet surged forward, every ship moving as one. The Predator ships retaliated, but the Deathworlders were relentless. Their weapons fired in perfect unison, hitting their targets with precision. The Predator ships tried to regroup, but the Deathworlders were faster. Ryland's eyes stayed locked on the command ship, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Deathworlders launched a final barrage at the Predator command ship, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. And then, the Predator ship exploded in a burst of fire and energy, its massive form breaking apart. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, the Predators began to retreat. Without their command ship, their forces scattered. It was chaos. The Deathworlders pressed their advantage, striking down the remaining Predator ships one by one. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had come. The predators were no longer in control. Rylan allowed himself a small breath of relief, but his mind was already focused on the next step. "Keep pushing forward," he ordered. "We can't let them regroup." The Deathworlders, exhausted but determined, followed his orders. And together with the Urantians, they began the final push to drive the predators out of their system for good. The deathly quiet that followed the destruction of the Predator command ship was short-lived. As the Predator fleet scattered, the Deathworlders had momentarily gained the upper hand. But Rylan knew it wasn't over yet. The Predators were crafty, relentless, and capable of regrouping faster than anyone could expect. He had seen their kind before, survivors who wouldn't stop until they had wiped out everything in their path. The Deathworlder fleet, battered but undefeated, continued to press forward. The remaining Predator ships attempted to retreat, but their disarray was clear. With no command structure left, the Predators were little more than a collection of desperate, uncoordinated forces. That didn't mean they weren't dangerous. Far from it. Even in chaos, they were still a threat. "Commander, we've got something coming in fast," Lyra said, her voice sharp with alarm. "I'm reading something big, much bigger than anything we've faced so far." Rylan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, bigger?" Lyra didn't hesitate. "It's another Predator ship, but this one is. It's enormous. It looks like it's carrying an entire army." Rylan's heart sank. He had feared this moment. The Predators' ability to adapt, to evolve their tactics, was one of their deadliest traits, and this new ship wasn't just a reinforcement. It was a final gamble, a last-ditch effort to take control of the war. "Shut down the escape routes," Rylan ordered, his voice calm but resolute. "We're not letting this one slip by. Prepare all weapons." The Deathworlder fleet braced itself for what was coming. The massive Predator ship barreled through space toward them, a dark, shadowy behemoth. Its sleek, organic surface was covered in thick plating, unlike anything the Deathworlders had seen. It moved with unnatural speed, its sheer size dwarfing the remaining Predator ships. "It's massive," Lyra muttered under her breath. "If we don't disable it now, we'll be fighting this thing for days." The Predator ship opened fire, unleashing a torrent of energy blasts. The Deathworlder fleet scattered, narrowly avoiding the devastating beams. But Rylan could see the devastation in their wake. The larger Predator ship had come to do more than just fight. It had come to destroy. "Focus on its weak points," Rylan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we hit the core, it'll go down like the rest of them." The fleet coordinated, launching a full barrage of missiles and energy blasts at the massive ship. But the Predator ship's defenses were unlike any other. It was almost as if the ship was alive, healing its wounds as fast as the Deathworlders could strike. Rylan watched in frustration as the ship's surface rippled, repairing itself. "This thing's a monster," Lyra said, her voice tight with strain. "We can't keep up with its regeneration." Rylan's eyes narrowed. There was one chance, and it would take everything they had. "Get me a direct line to Veller," he ordered. The communication channel opened, and Veller's face appeared on the screen. The Urantian leader looked weary but determined. "Commander Rylan, we're ready to assist. What do you need?" "We need a coordinated strike on the Predator's core," Rylan explained. "We're dealing with a living ship, but if we can hit its heart, it'll be over. We need your people's knowledge of the terrain and your weapons." Veller nodded. "Understood. We'll give you everything we've got." Within moments, the Urantian ships moved into position, their advanced weaponry adding to the Deathworlders' firepower. Together, the two forces launched their final assault. The Predator ship fought back with every weapon it had, but the combined might of the Deathworlders and the Urantians was too much. The core of the massive ship cracked, its defenses overwhelmed by the relentless assault. With a violent shudder, the Predator ship exploded, sending a shockwave through space. The remaining Predator forces, leaderless and broken, began to retreat in full disarray. Rylan stood still for a moment, watching as the Predator fleet scattered like insects. It was over. The battle had been won. But there was no time to celebrate. Rylan knew that the war was far from over. The Predators might retreat now, but they would be back. And next time, they wouldn't underestimate the might of the Deathworlder fleet. "Prepare for the next wave," Rylan said. "We're not finished yet." The battle seemed to stretch on forever, but after the massive Predator ship was destroyed, the Predator's once unified fleet was scattered. For a brief moment, it seemed like the fight was over. The Deathworlders and the Arantians, exhausted but victorious, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Yet Commander Rylan knew better than to think the war was won. He stood at the front of the command deck, watching as the scattered Predator ships flood into deep space. The screens were filled with the fading traces of enemy vessels disappearing into the dark void. It wasn't over. Not yet. The Predators had proven time and again that they never truly gave up, no matter how severe their losses. Lyra approached him, her face grim. "It's not over, is it?" Rylan shook his head. "No, this is just the beginning. They'll regroup, find new ways to attack. We need to prepare for whatever comes next." But as he spoke, a new signal appeared on the communication screen. This time, from Veller, the Arantian leader. His face looked tense, but there was something different in his eyes. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Commander Rylan," Veller began, "I wanted to thank you again. The Predators are retreating. You've given us a chance to rebuild, to fight another day." Rylan nodded. "We'll take every moment we can get. But don't let your guard down. The Predators will be back, and when they come, they'll be more dangerous than ever." Veller paused, his gaze steady. "We understand. And we will stand with you. Together, we will fight until the end. You've given us hope, Commander." Rylan felt a rare moment of pride. The Deathworlders and the Arantians, once separated by their differences, had forged an alliance that had withstood the test of battle. They were stronger together, and despite the fierce fight ahead, he believed they had a chance. The Deathworlder fleet continued to patrol the perimeter of the Arantian planet, waiting for the next move. The quiet after the chaos of the battle felt strange. The fleet's ships were battered, some taking heavy damage, but their crews were alive, and that was what mattered. The Predators had underestimated them, and for the first time, it was the Deathworlders who held the advantage. Days passed, and the tension never lifted. The enemy was still out there, hiding in the depths of space, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Rylan and his fleet were ready. They had faced impossible odds before, and each time they had survived. This time would be no different. But then, a new signal flashed across the screens. It wasn't a Predator ship. It was a message, one that had been sent across the galaxy, to anyone who would listen. The message was clear, its words chilling in their simplicity. "We will return, and next time, you will not survive." Rylan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The Predators weren't retreating. They were regrouping, gathering their forces, and they had learned. They had learned how to deal with the Deathworlder fleet, and they would not make the same mistake again. Rylan clenched his fists, his eyes burning with determination. "Then we'll be ready for them. We won't back down. We'll fight until the very end." The alliance had been forged in battle, and now it would be tested again. But Rylan knew one thing for sure. The Deathworlder fleet had become a force unlike any other. They had shown the Predators what it meant to face a true enemy. And next time, the Predators would learn that their worst mistake was underestimating the strength of the Deathworlder fleet. The message had left a mark on everyone. "We will return. And next time, you will not survive." Those chilling words echoed through Commander Rylan's mind as he stared at the screen. The Predators had sent their warning, a reminder that the war was far from over. But rather than instill fear, it sparked something deeper within him. Resolve. Rylan stood on the command deck, his eyes narrowing at the stars outside. The Deathworlder fleet had fought tooth and nail to defend the Arantians. They had defeated the Predator's strongest forces, crippled their command ship, and sent them running. But now, the true test awaited. The Predators were regrouping. They would return, and the Deathworlders would be ready. "Commander," Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing by a console, scanning the incoming reports. "We've got movement. The Predators are already sending scouts to their old positions. They're testing the waters." Rylan nodded. "They won't stop until they think they've won. We've got to take the initiative. No more waiting." He turned to the crew. The room was full of soldiers and officers, all focused on their tasks. The battle might have shifted in their favor, but the Predators were not finished yet, and neither were the Deathworlders. "Prepare for a counteroffensive," Rylan ordered. "We'll hit them before they can regroup fully. This time, we'll show them that Earth's fleet doesn't back down." The fleet began moving, all ships powering up and positioning themselves around the Arantian planet. Rylan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The Deathworlders had faced battles before, but this one felt different. They weren't just defending. They were about to take the fight directly to the enemy's doorstep. As the Deathworlder fleet surged forward, the Arantians rallied beside them. Veller, the Arantian leader, had never been more determined. The defeat of the Predators had given him a new sense of purpose, and he saw the Deathworlders not as strangers, but as true allies. The battle had forged a bond that went beyond simple military strategy. It was a brotherhood. "We're not just fighting for our planet anymore," Veller said to Rylan during a private transmission. "We're fighting for a new future, a future where we stand side by side." Rylan nodded, his face serious but resolute. "We fight together. We make sure the Predators know they'll never break us." The fleet moved quickly, a wave of ships cutting through the stars. The Predators had underestimated the Deathworlders before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Hours later, the battle began. The Deathworlder fleet was relentless, moving in perfect coordination with the Arantians. The Predator scouts had barely begun to react before the first salvo hit. The Predators fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the Deathworlders' speed and precision. The battle turned in their favor as each strike landed on its mark, taking out ship after ship, one by one. Rylan watched as the Predator ships began to falter. Their retreat was no longer a slow escape. It was a panic. The Deathworlder fleet had broken their will to fight. But this wasn't just about victory in battle. It was about sending a message. "We're not just surviving anymore," Rylan said, his voice steady. "We're taking the fight to them, and we won't stop until we've secured our future." The Predator fleet was in full retreat now, scattering like leaves in the wind. Their once mighty force had been broken, and it was clear that the Deathworlder fleet, now joined by the Arantians, was a force to be reckoned with. The battle was over. The Predators had been defeated, and their threat was finally neutralized. Rylan stood at the helm, looking out at the stars. The galaxy would remember this day. The Predators had underestimated the strength of the Deathworlders, and that would be their biggest mistake. The Deathworlder fleet had not only saved the Arantians, they had made a lasting mark on the galaxy. And now, a new era had begun. An era where alliances were stronger, where humanity's might was undeniable, and where no enemy would ever be allowed to threaten their world again.